what's the most relevant species for us to look at? It's social primates.
Yep.
Right? That's what we are. We're a highly social primate. There are no social primates that are sexually monogamous. Zero.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Could you explain the differences for the listeners between monogamy, polyamory, and polygamy, just so that they have a context for those?
Sure. The first thing I would want to distinguish is between emotional monogamy and sexual monogamy, because there's a lot of confusion around this when scientists refer to so-called monogamous species that are generally birds, because you see the male and the female bird tending the nest together. They're cooperating. One of them's protecting the fledglings while the other's off, catching fish or whatever. And swans, for example, they say, oh, well, swans are monogamous because we have a male and a female in the babies. Turns out that once DNA testing became cheap enough that students could start testing the feathers that are left in the nest by the male and the female against the feathers of the babies, they find that in many cases, the male social father of those babies is not the biological father.
Right. Interesting.
So many of the species that people will tell you are monogamous actually are only, emotionally or socially monogamous, but not sexually.
Right. It's kind of like people that say you should be a vegetarian because gorillas are vegetarians and look how much muscle they have. And I say, yes, but you forgot one thing. Gorillas have enzymes for breaking cellulose down that human beings don't have. Yeah. So if you can eat a bowl full of fiber and maintain muscle mass, then hallelujah. But the rest of you are going to get sick and become my patients because of that kind of.
Right.
Point being is when you get these ideological belief systems that are not evaluated and investigated, then you get beliefs that turn out to be problematic to one's own health and well-being. And I think psychologically and socially, what you're bringing up is very important, because I've seen that exact argument used by many people arguing for the fact that we are monogamous by nature and should always be that way. And then it's picked up by religious people who use, look, here's an example of this bird, they blah, blah, and then they go off on their whole thing. But that's just unchecked. You know what that is cherry picking to suit your program bias.
Right. And they're picking very distant cherries, right? Like,
yes.
Penguins, like the March of the Penguins was a big thing. I did a little riff on that in Sex at Dawn. So, the March of the Penguins was this movie. It's about how the male and the female protect the young and the storms and the cold winds of Antarctica and blah, 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 blah. And I mean, churches across America were renting cinemas to show this film to their congregations. The whole thing was this great celebration of monogamy and Jesus was right and blah, blah, blah. So I looked into it, and they're emperor penguins is the species that's in that film. And it turns out that emperor penguins live about 35 years. They reach sexual maturity at about 15 or so. And from that point on, they're monogamous for each breeding cycle. So they're only monogamous with their partner for 1 year. Then next year, it's a different one. So they've got 15 or 20 sexual partners in their lives.
Right, yeah, but we can't tell that in church.
So, yeah, it's cherry picking in terms of the species being used as examples, and also the aspect of that species behavior that's being discussed. So it's if you look at, as I said earlier, what's the most relevant species for us to look at? It's social primates.
Yep.
Right? That's what we are. We're a highly social primate. There are no social primates that are sexually monogamous. Zero. Yeah. So that's inconvenient. So let's look at birds, So anyway, the difference between, so monogamy is having one acknowledged sexual partner when we're talking about sexual monogamy.
Yeah.
Often, though, it refers to one marriage partner.
Hmm.
So, in historical references to monogamy, it refers to the woman having one husband.
Yes.
It does not refer to the man's sexual behavior. So, according to that definition, which is the most common definition of monogamy used until the last 30 or 40 years, as long as the woman is only having sex with her husband, it doesn't matter what the husband's doing. He could be boning the maid, he could be seeing prostitutes, he could have a concubine. That's considered a monogamous relationship because the woman is only having sex with him. So, there's
That's
great hypocrisy built into that.
Yes, and that's classically Christian behavior. I mean, if you go back to early Christianity and see how they set it up, the man had complete control of his woman, but he could tell that woman she had to have sex with his workers or anybody he wanted to. And if she had sex with anybody else, could get stoned to death, gutted, killed, tortured.
Yeah.
I mean, when you
And,
start
and,
looking
and
into
that's
this
still the
shit,
case now,
oh my
right? In
God, it's
Afghanistan, Pakistan, many societies, if a woman is raped, she's considered
a whore.
useless.
Yeah,
Yeah,
dirty. Yeah,
she
they'll
she
kill her.
has no value. Yeah,
Yeah, they might even kill her.
right.
It's this what we're talking about is such a dangerous disease to the sustainability of culture because it leads to so much psychological trauma for the women in particular. I mean, I tell people all the time, if you study Christianity and how it treats women, it's a shock to me that any woman would ever be a Christian because you're stepping right into a historical melting pot that is very, very destructive and denigrating to females right from the very beginning of the whole Adam and Eve story.
Yeah. Do you know the history of the term Vestal Virgin or of that concept?
I don't recall the particulars. I might once you start talking about it.
What's quite interesting, it's the first use of the term virgin that's come down to us, and it did not mean a woman who doesn't have sex. It meant a woman who was untouched by men. In other words, a woman who was not part of the marriage, the world of marriage and family and all that. So sacred prostitutes, which were plentiful in ancient Greece and Rome, were considered virgins
Ah,
because they were unmarried.
right.
So these terms are packed with all sorts of assumptions and meanings and hypocrisies. So, as that preamble, monogamy refers to the marriage of one couple with one other person. I'm saying person because now we have gay marriage, and
Yeah.
I guess a gay monogamous relationship would be sexually just those two men or two women with each other. Although there are interesting permutations there. Gay men, for example, tend to understand the difference between sexual and social monogamy instinctively.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. Polygamy, there's confusion around that because polygamy normally is used as one man, several women.
Mm-hmm.
But the correct term there is polygyny, Gyn, meaning like gynecological, right? Referring to multiple females, but one male. So gorillas that you mentioned earlier, they're a polygynous harem-based mating system where you have one alpha male and he has several females that only he can have sex with,
Right.
which results in some interesting issues in terms of the evolution of the genitals in gorillas versus other species. It turns out that when only one male is having sex with the females, evolution favors the development of big muscles, weapons like fangs and horns or whatever's used in that particular animal to beat the other males so that he can have sex with the females. But often results in shrinkage of genitalia. So
Yes.
a gorilla's penis is the size of your pinky finger,
Right.
fully erect,
Yeah.
because there's no sperm competition happening.
Right.
Once you win the fight, there's no more competition. Whereas with bonobos or chimps, or I've argued humans, there's more evolutionary pressure on the genitalia because there is sperm competition happening.
Right.
So that's a whole other thing. Um, and then polyamory refers to several different ongoing loving situations. So
Mhm.
actual intimacy, not just sex happening.
So the polygamy, I was always under the understanding that it was multiple marriages. But if I heard you right, you don't have to be married to be in a polygamous relationship.
Well, no, not particularly not when you're talking about other species, right?
Okay.
So a lot of people would refer to gorillas as a polygamous species. Um,
Because I know
so
the Mormons are referred to as polygamous.
yeah, yeah, it generally refers to one male, multiple females.
Yes.
And it's assumed that the females are monogamous with that one male. But again, definitions of these things are very slippery because they change, in terms of culture, in terms of species over time, and some people in their own lives would have their own definitions. The term I like is ethical non-monogamy. I think that sort of encompasses all different alternatives to the sort of standard, lie-based monogamous. And again, I'm not saying all monogamy is lie-based. My
No.
parents were monogamously married for 50 some years, and they were very happy. So I never want to be misinterpreted to be implying that everyone who's monogamous is full of shit and cheating behind their partner's back. That's not always the case. And actually, Sex at Dawn doesn't argue in favor of any particular approach to forming a relationship other than authenticity.